My name is Morne Mostert. I'm the Director of the Institute for Futures Research at the University of Stellenbosch. Today I'm going to talk to you about exponential organisations, a new type, a new breed of organisations that is growing at a rate that is much more rapid than traditional 20th century organisations. Salim Ismail and his colleagues wrote a fascinating book, Exponential Organisations. One of the findings that they share is that the average half-life of a business competency in around 1990 was 20 years. Today, the average half-life of a business competency is 5 years. Now, this has significant implications for business schools and for institutes of higher learning that prepare leaders and managers of the future. What does it mean for a business school? Well, it means that if you graduate today, within 5 years of your day of graduation, half of what you've learned is really defunct, no longer of use. That means that continuous education will be one of the very serious strategic objectives of business schools of the future. It also has very significant implications for in-house development by large organizations who train their own leaders and managers to make sure that they're fit for the future. So it is no longer possible to train your own managers and leaders once and then leave them to lead the future as if nothing will change. Very soon, according to Exponential Organisations, those competencies will in fact expire. It also is not good enough to even go back once a decade. Learning, of course, is something then that happens on a continuous basis. Now, naturally, everybody would say that they agree with the concept of lifelong learning. But the reality is that managers are busy people. They have spreadsheets and presentations and reports to make, and the truth is they have very little time to learn actively. In future, business schools will have to create those opportunities, and large organizations would have to create the spaces for their senior leaders to do learning not just on the fly, as they might do in organizations, but in a formal, structured way. In other words, learning journeys will become much longer, but we'll have a lot more frequency of learning. That also has implications for the budgets of developing your own leaders, as of course that means time away from the office and time spent on institutions like business schools. It also means that business schools would have to deliver competencies that are relevant and current. In other words, it's no longer sufficient for a business school professor to share the findings of his own PhD from 10 years ago with leaders who are thinking about what the future might mean for their own organization. The authors further argue that one of the ways in which exponential organizations remain current is to make use of this concept of staff on demand. In other words, in a traditional 20th century organization, the way that we define staff were really people who were hired, typically on a full-time basis, and typically over a very lifelong period. In fact, people often had to explain to their banks that they were hired on a so-called permanent basis. We know from the current rate of change, of course, that something like permanent employment is no longer the case. In some cases, in the 20th century, permanent was sometimes replaced with full-time. Even the notion of full-time staff members is changing, and what exponential organizations seem to be very effective at doing is using staff in a certain sense as and how they need them. Now, you might say this is an absolutely chaotic mess of an organization, but as always, you really need both sides. You need a very strong operational core with platforms and strong infrastructure, and then you need the technology to make use of people as and when you need them. Of course, we're all familiar with remote working, but what these guys are saying is, with the use of technology platforms, you can tap into the natural creativity of staff on demand. And this, I think, is a fascinating organizational phenomenon. Think about it. There will always be more creative, more intelligent people on the outside of an organization than on the inside. Even if you're hiring 100,000 people, there are more than 7 billion people on Earth. Surely you can't argue that all of the most creative ones are inside your organization. And this leads to a very interesting idea of rethinking the boundaries of an organization. Is an organization really, as we used to think in the 20th century, something that is defined by its current customers and its current staff members? It seems that exponential organizations are challenging the very definition of where those boundaries are. Not only do we need to rethink what a member of staff is, but we also need to rethink the role that customers play in an organization. Now, typically, in the 20th century, customers were people on the outside of an organization. People that we engaged with essentially to make a quick buck from, and ideally to do that on a regular basis through programs like customer loyalty. What new organizations, exponential organizations, are doing is they're using their customer base and even potential customers to help them think about how their new products, how their new innovations for the future might look. And they use this, once again, in a way that leverages technology platforms. In other words, exponential organizations think differently about what a member of staff is. It could be someone who works for an organization for 60 seconds a day, just expressing a view of what they may observe. Or it may be someone who works like a classical executive for 10 or 12 hours a day. And it redefines what a customer is. A customer is no longer just someone who gives you money. A customer is also someone who can help you think creatively about what your product range of the future might be. Exponential organizations therefore believe firmly in the idea of the wisdom of the crowd. It's really the idea that, as opposed to 20th century organizations that tend to believe in the wisdom of a very small executive team, a group of people with all the wisdom the organization may ever need, the shift is really moving to, let's ask people. We get a large number of clients often asking us, I wonder how we can find out what our clients really want. Well, what organizations like these are saying is, let's ask them. Let's ask the crowd. We might learn something. The truth is that with the democratization of knowledge through the internet, the crowd now has levels of wisdom that we've never seen before. In the past, it used to be, in fact, managers and leaders that went to university that had access to learning and knowledge. Now, every single one of your customers is a potential creative force who may contribute to the way that you conceive of the design of future products and services for your organization. Well, you may ask, what are the implications for management control? We would argue that that's a classical 20th century question. The effectiveness of an organization is really not measured on the degree of control that it can exert. From a complexity perspective, what we would argue is there order? Now, order doesn't resemble what it used to resemble in the 20th century. But through the use of technology platforms, feedback may be derived from a wide range of staff members, some of them full-time, some of them very much part-time, and may also be derived from customers. Some of them current customers, some of them potential customers, and some of them even so-called alumni customers, people who used to be customers and have for some reason decided they no longer wish to engage with you. Now, in the traditional 20th century organization, we used to think, well, those customers are no longer relevant. Exponential organizations say there's a lot of wisdom that we can gain from the kind of decisions that these people make.